From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Joe Matthew, I'm Kaylee Lyons.
The Senate advances the $95 billion foreign aid package, putting the bill on track for final passage late today. We'll have more on the difference it could make in the war in Ukraine with Melinda Haring of the Atlantic Council.
We'll also discuss Israel's ongoing war with Hamas and recent anti-Semitism on college campuses with Democratic Congresswoman Kathy Manning of North Carolina.
Plus, President Biden campaigning today in Florida, focusing on the issue of abortion, as Donald Trump spends another day in court in New York, where the judge in his hush money trial heard arguments as to whether he's violated his gag order. Kaylee, we wait for news on that as we watch closely what's happening today in the Senate. They could be pulling the cots out tonight, as we understand it could be a late night. Then again, things have been moving pretty efficiently today, considering the number of delays that could have been had in passing this bill that will bring funding for Ukraine, Israel, Taiwan. We've got TikTok attached to this. They were all passed in separate chunks in the House.
Yep. And
now it's one big vote, full smash tonight.
Yes, and it got massive bipartisan approval in terms of the test vote we saw earlier today, the so-called cloture vote. It's all procedure, but it sets us up for what is very likely to be passage late this evening and a victory for the Democratic Senate Majority Leader, Chuck Schumer, who took to the Senate floor earlier, urging lawmakers not only to move quickly on this legislation so the president can sign it, but also talking about how significant this moment is.
We have a choice. We can either make a down payment on defending our security or finding ourselves on the back foot, facing much graver threats in years and decades to come. The only answer is the right one. We must act now.
For more, we're lucky to have Bloomberg's Mike Shepard with us in Washington. A big moment today. Mike, we can probably forecast what's going to happen in the real vote here based on what we saw in the cloture vote. More senators voted for this with the TikTok additive than did with just the funding for our allies than the bill that passed in February. What does that tell us?
Well, it tells me, and it should tell the rest of Washington, that they are sensing the urgency of the moment. They're looking at the situation across the Atlantic in Ukraine with increased concern. And they're realizing that if they don't act now, it may at some point become too late. And they really want to make sure that they are getting ahead of whatever may await Ukraine and the government in Kiev.
And of course, it seems that the House Speaker, Mike Johnson, also finally understood potentially the gravity of the situation, or at least that's what he signaled. Once he had seen intelligence is what pushed him to finally get this across the House. But we know he potentially could face consequence for that in terms of a motion to vacate that could be brought by Marjorie Taylor Greene. Interestingly, though, former President Trump reiterated his support for Speaker Johnson yesterday on a radio show. This is what he said.
We have a majority of one, okay? So it's not like he can go and do whatever he wants to do. I think he's a very good person. It's a tough situation when you have one. I think he's a very good man. I think he's trying very hard. And again, we've got to have a big election. We've got to elect some people in Congress, much more than we have right now.
So, Mike, does it seem the former president is going to save the current speaker?
Well, he is sending a signal to the people who might wish harm upon Mike Johnson in the House right now that it might not be such a good idea to go through the same exercise they went through at some political cost last year. You'll remember the same procedure. The motion to vacate was used to oust Johnson's predecessor, Kevin McCarthy. And Johnson had struggled for months since taking the Speaker's gavel. And he was really dealing with this restive group of hardliners led by Marjorie Taylor Greene, who at any moment's notice signaled they could pull the trigger on him, too, at the same motion to vacate. By letting them know that it might not be in their best interest, Trump is also letting the public know that, hey, the last thing we need heading into the election is another speaker fight that could reflect poorly on the Republican Party.
All right. Right, Bloomberg's Michael Shepard, thank you so much, as always, for joining us this evening. And speaking of former President Trump, he, of course, is still trying to campaign for a second term in the White House, but he spent most of his day in a courtroom in New York. Here was his response earlier as the court held a hearing about whether he violated a gag order preventing him from disparaging witnesses.
We have a gag order, which to me is totally unconstitutional. I'm not allowed to talk, but people are allowed to talk about me. So they can talk about me, they can say whatever they want, they can lie, but I'm not allowed to say anything. I'd love to say everything that's on my mind, but I'm restricted because I have a gag order.
For more, we go now to our Texas Bureau Chief, Julie Fine, joining us from Dallas tonight. So, Julie, we didn't actually get a decision from the judge as to whether or not he's going to hold Donald Trump in contempt of court for violating this gag order. But we also do see on display a former president that seems to be a bit frustrated with the lack of control he has in this situation.
Oh, you can absolutely tell as he sits in the courtroom. And he had to be pretty frustrated today when the judge said to his attorneys, "You're losing all credibility with the court," when they were discussing this gag order, asking for specific examples. This is very difficult for him. Obviously, he has to sit there. He has to sit through this entire trial. He cannot be on the campaign trail during the days when all of this is going on. And you look at some of the things that have been said about Michael Cohen, his former attorney, the former president, basically saying that he had nothing to do with the fact that Michael Cohen ended up going to jail. So clearly he is very frustrated with this process as he waits to see if the judge decides he violated this gag order.
Well, I'll tell you what, the contrast is remarkable. Julie, we hear so much about the split screen as Donald Trump is locked up in the courtroom. Joe Biden is, in contrast, looks like he's on a road trip movie. Today he got his way to Florida, is in Tampa, in fact, and speaking specifically about the matter of abortion ahead of the state implementing the 6-week abortion ban that made such headlines when it was first passed. Take a listen to what he told organizers there.
I think Florida's in play nationally. There's some animating issues, obviously. Choice is one of them.
Choice is one of them. Julie, obviously, he's got a real message to send. But Florida, is this an opportunity to make news or to actually win electoral votes?
Well, I think at this point, it's certainly an opportunity to make news. I mean, he is in a state right now that a presidential candidate has not won in years. So obviously he is going there, and he's doing this, again, like you just referred to, with a split screen of the former president sitting in a courtroom. And then he starts talking about an issue that is clearly a winner with Democrats. He talks about abortion. You've seen it, Joe, in blue states and red states and purple states, how that has fared when it's been on the ballot. So this gives him a good opportunity to say, hey, I think this is in play, or at least portray that while talking about an issue that he knows is a winner with some of his voters.
It's great to have you back, Julie. Bloomberg's Texas Bureau Chief Julie Fine with us on Balance of Power. Coming up, we'll take a closer look at the expected security assistance that could soon be approved for Ukraine. Melinda Haring of the Atlantic Council joins us next for the on-the-ground impacts of this money. It's coming up next on Balance of Power, Bloomberg TV and radio.
It will allow Ukraine to defend the front lines for this fighting season. I think if we were smart, and I think DOD is smart, they've pre-positioned much of the ammunition already in pre-positioned stocks. So I think it'll get to the battlefield quickly, but there is still a massive numerical advantage on the part of the Russians right now in terms of ammunition and personnel for that matter.
Retired Army Brigadier General Mark Kimmett on how the fresh round of battlefield and air defense assistance will help Ukraine as we wait final Senate passage of the bill that would provide the money, the more than $60 billion in aid to the country. The president says he's waiting to sign it. Could happen before this day is out. For more on where that aid could be used, how exactly, we're joined by Melinda Haring of the Atlantic Council. Melinda, it's great to have you with us. We've been talking for months over this tortured debate. And I know that you were in Kyiv recently. Before we start getting into following the money and talking about weapon systems and strategy, I want to ask you, knowing that it's going to take a minute for some of that material to get there, what it means now for morale in the battlefield.
It's huge. It's enormous. So this is an 8-month delay. And when I look online and when I talk to Ukrainians, they are so happy. Yes, they want to know why it took so long, but they are preparing a celebratory meal when President Biden finally signs that law into passage. And individual soldiers are making videos and celebrating this moment. So it will be felt on the battlefield. And I agree with the general. This package will allow the Ukrainians a little bit of breathing room for the next 6 to 12 months.
Well, Melinda, I feel like I've been asking this question in various ways since it became clear that this ultimately was going to pass. Is this aid that is going to allow Ukraine to keep the status quo, essentially, in terms of just being able to hold the line? Or is this aid that is actually going to allow Ukraine to potentially advance in some kind of counteroffensive? What realistically are we talking about here?
Hey, Kylie. So it's going to enable the Ukrainians to hold the line. Without the aid, the line probably would have fallen. So this is a really big deal. Kharkiv was vulnerable, and also the Donbass was vulnerable. So it's going to enable the Ukrainians to hold the line for the rest of 2024. And the hope is that it will, after the rotation of Ukrainian forces, that the Ukrainian side will be able to prepare some kind of major counteroffensive in 25.
A major counteroffensive. It's interesting, Melinda, we spoke about this with Kelly Grieco, Senior Fellow with the Reimagining U.S. Grand Strategy Program at the Stimson Center. I'd love for you to listen to what she said, and we'll have you respond.
We need to start thinking really seriously about long-term strategy here and pivoting from a talk about liberating all Ukrainian territory and militarily defeating Russia to how do we create a credible, sustainable defense for Ukraine, because this is a war of attrition and it's stalemated, and bringing it to the negotiating table.
I don't know if you want to have that conversation right now, Melinda, or if you think it's time for that conversation, but we're hearing more and more people talk to us at Bloomberg about how to leverage this money to strengthen Ukraine's position at the negotiating table, as opposed to punching through Russian lines and staging a counteroffensive. What do you think?
Hey, Joe, I would say it's way too soon. I would say no, no, no. So if you look at Ukrainian public opinion, 60% of Ukrainians say they want to continue to fight. There is not an appetite for negotiations in Moscow or in Kyiv. So this money provides breathing room for the Ukrainians to reconstitute their forces, to rotate, and then to hold the line for the rest of the year. We know that Russia's preparing some kind of major offensive this summer. So it's not going to be an easy year. I'm not predicting roses. Let's be realistic. Mm-hmm. But this is a long war, and there's no reason to talk about negotiations at this point. There's no appetite for it on either side.
Well, Melinda, it kind of brings us back to the point that there is another side of this, and that, of course, is Russia. That is who Ukraine is fighting against. And I just wonder how you think Russian behavior may change, knowing that more aid is coming to Ukraine, that they're going to have access to more than they would have otherwise. Does it actually make it a harder fight to fight for Ukraine?
Kylie, Moscow is not pleased. So if you look at the Russian newspapers today, they're denouncing Speaker Johnson. They are calling him a traitor. They are upset that he has changed his tune. Will it be harder? Well, look, the Russians are preparing a big fight for this summer. But no, the arms that we're seeing right now, the U.S. has done something very smart. It pre-positioned aid in Poland and in Europe. So as soon as President Biden signs that law and it passes, it means that ammo is going to flow to the front lines. And that is a big deal. It's going to make the fight easier for the Ukrainians and going to ease the rationing we've seen. We've seen 10-1, 8-1, 7-1, depending where the guys are on the front line. And it's going to give them a chance to actually fire back.
Melinda, Kayleigh and I have been asking the same question of everyone with your experience on this story. Is this the last aid package for Ukraine?
Joe, it really depends on the choice that Americans make this fall at the ballot box. So I don't know the answer to that question. If President Trump is elected as president, yes. If Biden is reelected, no. So it really depends on the choice that Americans have to make. Is it possible to squeeze another Ukraine aid package if Trump is reelected? Maybe. But this one was so hard fought. It took miracles to pass this aid. We could do a whole show on what it took to pass this aid. So I think it's unlikely to see another aid package on Trump's watch unless he had some major change of heart, and I don't foresee that.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Melinda Haring of the Atlantic Council, we appreciate you continuing to come to us as this entire saga has unfolded over months and months. We appreciate your time. Coming up still, the Federal Trade Commission votes to ban non-compete agreements, leaving some big businesses up in arms. We'll have a closer look at that next with the director of the FTC's Office of Public Affairs, Douglas Farrar. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and Radio.
Look, my executive order calls on the FTC to ban or limit non-compete agreements. Let workers choose who they want to work for.
That was President Biden back in 2021, urging the Federal Trade Commission to limit non-compete agreements. And the agency did so today, banning them in a 3-2 vote. Tyler Kendall explains what it could mean for business. Hey, Tyler.
Hey, Kaylee, this decision has potentially far-reaching impacts as companies across a broad range of industries from banking to healthcare use non-compete agreements when hiring. This bans non-competes going forward, as well as rescinds any existing terms. The FTC alleges employers have had an unfair advantage in hiring and that this would allow an estimated 30 million American workers to no longer be subject to non-compete restrictions. But there is stark opposition, largely from the business community. This includes concerns former employees could share confidential information non-competes are designed to protect. I spoke with the Chamber of Commerce earlier today. The group's planning to sue the FTC later this week.
If 3 people can decide what they think is an unfair method of doing business and then have the power by regulation to tell businesses what you can and can't do, we've really opened a Pandora's box here.
They're not the only ones against banning non-competes. The trade group representing the securities industry wrote the FTC before the vote. They said the rule will hurt competition and upend a long-established practice. Executives from some of the biggest banks like J.P. Morgan, Citigroup, and Goldman Sachs sit on the trade group's board and serve as officers. Joe and Kaylee, this decision is expected to go into effect in about 4 months, but the future is uncertain with these looming legal battles.
All right, Tyler, thank you so much. Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall with an important story for our viewers and listeners today at Bloomberg. And to talk about it a little bit more, we're joined now by Douglas Farrar, director of the FTC's Office of Public Affairs. Doug, it's great to see you. Welcome back to the table. How do you answer the complaints from groups like the Chamber of Commerce who say, hey, how do 3 people make a decision like this for everybody?
Well, thanks for having me back. What we would say first is our authority to do this is clear. The plain reading of the statute, the FTC Act, that gives us the authority to do this, says that we are charged with banning unfair methods of competition in the economy, and it gives us the authority to write rules to do just that. So from our perspective, we're on crystal clear legal authority, and we also have precedent of courts agreeing with this authority over the long history of the FTC. And if I can just take a moment to say how important this ban is. These non-compete clauses cover 30 million Americans and really restrain and restrict their economic freedom to seek a new job or start a new business. So we're proud of our action today.
I just wonder why the FTC views this as action that needs to be taken at kind of the federal regulatory level and not left up to individual states, because I believe this was an issue in the state of New York and ultimately Governor Kathy Hochul vetoed it.
This is a really interesting question. Unlike a lot of policy issues, we have a natural experiment that's occurred in this country. There are 3 states, California, Oklahoma, and North Dakota, who don't have non-competes going back to 1800. So we have a lot of data that shows how trade secrets can be protected, but the economy can grow and workers can have more freedom to seek out new jobs and make more money. And so we're making this policy knowing that its impact will be really positive based on that natural experiment.
Mm-hmm. There's a carve out here for certain individuals either making a good deal of money or who are directors in a company. Part of the complaints that we hear about, hey, how do you control executive pay when they're all allowed to cross the street just to make more money?
Well, the carve-out is less than 1% of all people bound by a non-compete. And that's a senior executive making over a certain threshold of money who also has a policy ability to influence policy at a business.
And you need to check both those boxes?
You have to check both those boxes. But that non-compete clause is only going to continue until that contract runs out. They cannot sign a new non-compete clause with an employer. So it's a total ban after that. Okay. But think about this. A senior executive can negotiate for a non-compete clause. Pay me more money, give me more time off, whatever that may be. If you're a bartender, if you're a security guard, if you're a minimum wage worker being forced into a non-compete clause, your ability to negotiate for getting something out of that is almost none. And so that's why we want to make sure to ban these for the 30 million workers who are covered by it.
And as you said, you do believe the FTC has the authority to do so, that you can effectively write this rule. If you can write this rule, is there a limit to the others that you can write? Because that's essentially the chamber's concern, is that this actually would set a precedent where the FTC is able to grab onto authority elsewhere with using that same standard.
Well, I think, again, the reading of the text that we're basing this on is clear. We have the authority to do this, and the courts have agreed with that. I think the chamber objects to the substance of the rule and is trying to make a legal argument about its constitutionality or its legality in a different way. But we certainly feel we have the authority to do this, and the courts agree.
Without a legal challenge, when would this take effect?
So after it goes into the Federal Register, which should be any day now, it'll be 120 days after that. And we've also made it easy for businesses to comply. We aren't making them go back and rewrite contracts. We're just having them declare them unenforceable.
It's good to have you back at the table, Doug.
It's great to be here.
Douglas Farrar is director of the FTC's Office of Public Affairs. Kayleigh, this is a really important story for employers and for employees, and certainly something that we wanted to plant a flag on here at Bloomberg.
Absolutely. And clearly this is a story we will likely be covering over the next many months as these legal challenges play out in court, in a bit of a pattern we've seen with regulators under this administration facing a lot of challenges in court brought by business to what they're doing. So something we will continue to follow. And we appreciate the FTC and the chamber discussing this, both sides of the issue, on Bloomberg TV and radio today. And coming up, we'll have more still on television and radio as we discuss Israel's ongoing war with Hamas and the recent anti-Semitism on college campuses is with Democratic Congresswoman Kathy Manning of North Carolina. She was just up at Columbia University yesterday, and we just got news that the House Speaker Mike Johnson will be giving an address on anti-Semitism there tomorrow afternoon. So we'll get her reaction to that news next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
I believe a university it's a private institution, it's a private campus. And while students have the right to protest and exercise free speech, they don't have the right to violate Columbia rules and guidelines. And they certainly don't have the right to create a hostile environment for other students who are on campus whose main priority is to study and learn.
That was Hagar Shamali, adjunct professor at Columbia University School of International and Public Affairs, speaking with us earlier, discussing the escalating pro-Palestinian protests on that campus and others across the country that have stoked concerns around anti-Semitism. Joining us now is Democratic Congresswoman Kathy Manning of North Carolina, who is the co-chair of the House Bipartisan Task Force for Combating Anti-Semitism and was at Columbia with several of her House colleagues just yesterday. Congresswoman, thank you so much for being here. Can we first begin with what exactly you saw on campus and how you would like to see this addressed in the days moving forward?
Sure. First of all, I have to say it was very difficult for us to get on campus, and there were lots of people who were standing outside of the gates in the campus who were trying to get on, some who looked like they had business on the campus, others who did not. When we got on the campus, we had a chance to talk to some Jewish students before we went on campus. They talked about how difficult this has been for them, how intimidating, how what a hostile environment has been created. And it's been particularly difficult for students walking by themselves through campus to get to the library, to get to dorms. And it really is quite intimidating. When we walked on the campus, we saw the risers that are being set up for graduation, which clearly is an issue of huge concern. And then we saw, I would say, almost half of the main quad that has been turned into a tent city with tents all over the place, tightly packed in, many signs, people giving instructions for what the protesters should be doing, should be saying. And while we were there, people were relatively quiet. After we walked out of the quad to get to our next stop, we started to hear the chants, and you could hear the shouting and the chanting blocks and blocks away. So it was quite loud, quite disruptive. In fact, I talked to one student who is a law student trying to study for her final exams with all the shouting going on in the background. And she said it's been very, very difficult to study and disconcerting. And if you listen to the chants, they weren't chants we heard on campus, but chants I've seen on the videos. They are ugly, they are anti-Semitic, they are focusing on not just getting aid to Gaza. Certainly I didn't hear anybody protesting to get the hostages released, but there are phrases I heard about, frankly, destroying the state of Israel and killing Israelis. And that is very distressing in these times.
Congresswoman, the Speaker of the House is going to Columbia tomorrow. Mike Johnson is going to be meeting with Jewish students and will deliver remarks after. We understand he will not only deliver a speech, but will take questions. Do you support the Speaker getting involved like this, and what role could he play in bringing people together here?
I think it's very important for members of Congress, particularly somebody in the Speaker's position, to see firsthand what's going on college campuses and how disruptive it is, how much discrimination and harassment there is, and he can play a big role. I filed a bipartisan bill. It's the same bill we introduced on a bipartisan basis in the House, and it was introduced in the Senate by my colleague Jackie Rosen. It would take a broad approach to addressing anti-Semitism on college campuses, in K through 12 schools, online, and would establish a special official in the Department of Education to advise the Secretary on anti-Semitism to make sure that claims that are being filed are properly adjudicated on a timely basis, and would also establish a national coordinator in the White House to make sure that all our agencies are doing what's necessary to address anti-Semitism. The role the Speaker could play, he could bring my bill to the House and get a vote, and we could really make progress and move forward.
Well, I guess, Congresswoman, we will see if he does indeed do that. What he did do, though, was bring a series of bills to the House floor for a vote this past weekend. They all passed, and now the Senate looks on track for final passage tonight of this $95 billion foreign aid package. How much credit do you give the Speaker here? And is he worthy of potential Democratic protection if indeed one of his Republican colleagues decides to move on a motion to vacate?
I have to start by giving credit to Hakeem Jeffries, our leader on the Democratic side. I think Hakeem was instrumental in convincing the Speaker to get those bills to the floor. We obviously wish that those bills had gone to the floor quite a while ago. It's been particularly difficult for Ukraine. They are literally running out of ammunition. And the Ukraine bill, the Senate passed a good bill quite a while ago that should have come to the House floor. Unfortunately, one of the presidential candidates didn't want to solve the problems. He wanted to run on those problems. So I give Hakeem Jeffries enormous credit for working to get those bills to the floor. And certainly Democrats were there not only helping to pass the rule, which is the first step to getting the bill to the floor, but helping to pass the bill. I do give the Speaker credit in that he worked with Leader Jeffries to make sure that we could get those bills to the floor and get them passed.
I presume that presidential candidate you're referring to is not RFK Jr. Congresswoman, does Donald Trump run the House right now? Is he in charge of the Republican majority?
No. I believe that Donald Trump, when his word goes out, there are many Republicans who pay careful attention to it. There are some who are trying to do the right thing, but unfortunately, they're in the minority.
Congresswoman, great to have you with us. Democratic Congresswoman Kathy Manning of North Carolina, fresh off her visit to Columbia University's campus. We thank you for sharing that with us. Coming up, all eyes are on the Senate right now as the foreign aid bill we've been discussing heads for a final vote tonight. We'll assemble our political panel next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Taxpayer dollars in unaccountable aid to Ukraine. Unaccountable aid to Ukraine, including billions to pay this.
Delay in providing Ukraine the weapons to defend itself has strained the prospects of defeating Russian aggression. Dithering and hesitation have compounded the challenges we face. Today's action is overdue, but our work does not end here.
He certainly stayed the course. Mitch McConnell earlier today discussing the Senate vote on the foreign aid bill. That vote coming later tonight, final passage expected later on, just hours from now. And joining us now, our political panel, as we're joined by Sarah Chamberlain, Republican Main Street Partnership CEO, and Jim Kessler, Third Way Executive Vice President. It's wonderful to have both of you here on the latest edition of Called It with Sarah Chamberlain. It passed the House. You told us a couple of weeks ago that was going to happen when it was very much up in the air. We're going to talk about what happens next and where we're going to go tonight here, Sarah. But talk to us about the evolution of Mike Johnson. He's referred to the classified briefings, the meetings with foreign leaders, maybe even some of the conversations he's had with members of the administration. What were you hearing on Main Street about his turn toward Ukraine?
So the 3 M's, Mike Turner, Mike Rogers, and Michael McCall had briefings with him. The CIA director came in and briefed him. He went home and prayed about it, which he really does do. Yeah. And he came in the next day, met with the Main Street members, and said, we're going to do this. We always thought he would do it because he's really a good man, and ultimately he would have gotten to that place. So that's why I was able to say, yes, we're going to do the votes. Got it done on Saturday. Yeah. It was a long week last week, but we got it done. It was really the right thing for the people.
So really, was it only just, I guess, recognizing the intelligence that changed in the months in between the Senate passing a bill that looked almost identical to this and then the House finally taking action on it? I guess what was the whole exercise really about?
It was actually a couple of things. So we all know he really was a rank and file member. Yeah. Now he's a speaker, and he's really grown into that job. And really, when he got briefed on the intelligence, he realized, like, he's a speaker for all of the Republicans. And he stepped up, and he did a great job. And we see Donald Trump has rewarded that and is supporting him. And I think he'll stay the speaker through the end of the year at least.
We're hearing references to coalition government. I don't know if that makes you bristle or if that's the point, but the role Democrats played here needs to be acknowledged.
Yeah, I think it does. And look, this was a good day for the House of Representatives. I don't think it was a great day, but if it was a great day, it would have happened 4 months ago. And, you know, Mitch McConnell's right. Like, war doesn't wait while we dither. And I'm very glad that Mike Johnson got to the right place. This would have been great if this happened December 23rd, not April 23rd. I do believe Mike Johnson will survive and be Speaker. And if he needs Democratic votes, I believe he will get Democratic votes. This is a good thing. If you look at January 6th, like, just a huge scar for the nation, but also internally in the House of Representatives. I talked to a lot of Democratic House members who have said to me, it's hard for me to look at Republicans in the eye and even have a civil conversation after January 6th. There's a possibility that this sort of thing might create a thaw in which you can build relationships and, you know, maybe bipartisan coalitions again.
Okay, so as you talk about the idea that Democrats could save Mike Johnson, I guess it does become a question of whether or not Mike Johnson will need to potentially be saved if Donald Trump isn't saying that he needs to go out. Sarah alluded to this. Let's hear from the former president who was talking about Mike Johnson on a radio program yesterday.
We have a majority of one, okay? So it's not like he can go and do whatever he wants to do. I think he's a very good person. It's a tough situation when you have one. I think he's a very good man. I think he's trying very hard. And again, we've got to have a big election. We've got to elect some people in Congress, much more than we have right now.
Sarah, if Donald Trump doesn't bless a motion to vacate, would Marjorie Taylor Greene actually do it?
I actually don't know the answer to that question. I would hope not. But if she does, I agree the Democrats will step in and save her. And then our goal in November is to expand the numbers in the House of Representatives to the Republican side. Sorry, Jim.
Well, good luck with that.
Talk to us more about what's going to happen here in the Senate later on. We saw the procedural vote today. By the way, more senators voted for this than did back in February when TikTok was not part of the conversation, which is compelling to me. But we started with Mitch McConnell in this conversation. And this has been a long wait for him. A lot of folks counted him out. There's a leadership battle to replace him at this point. The role that he played here is significant, however. Does Mitch McConnell kind of have the last laugh in this debate?
Well, he has the last laugh in a lot of debates. I mean, he's very accomplished. I think he feels this is the capstone to his career. He is a Reagan Republican. He's an internationalist. On this, he has a very close relationship with Chuck Schumer as well on it. They work very, very closely on this. And I think this is a win for sanity. The idea that this package got held up for months, it's hard years ago to imagine America where this would actually happen. So, yeah, I think he gets the last laugh. Again, this should have happened 5 months ago.
Well, it's interesting, Jim, to hear you characterizing this as the last laugh, when technically he's going to stay the minority leader through the election. We still have months and months left of this Congress. But is this kind of the last thing we're realistically going to see accomplished? Is it all campaign from here?
It's hard to see too much getting done. There might be some budget things that get done. But this is, look, typically around this time, Congress starts to slow down. So I don't think we're going to see much going forward.
You sounded very hopeful a moment ago, though, that this could be the beginning of the opportunity, at least, to start forging new relationships and alliances. Is it a moment that Speaker Johnson can seize on? I know we're talking about maybe an FAA extension, what we could attach to that. Is there anything else that he can do now?
FAA, maybe a farm bill. There might be able to get 2 or 3 things done that the American people really need. And maybe we do work with the Democrats to achieve that.
SNAP program's a pretty good issue on the campaign trail, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Very good.
Well, that's an interesting point, because obviously there is still mandatory legislation in terms of the farm bill and stuff.
That's right.
That I guess either you don't, if you don't deal with it, you kick the can down the road or whatever it may be. But to kind of return to this point about feeling hopeful in this moment, Jim, is this, for all of the talk around working with Democrats or the idea that Mike Johnson had to turn to the other side to get things done, this is just another way of describing bipartisanship, right? We're not used to that in Washington anymore.
Right. I mean, Sarah said this earlier, like he's matured into the speakership role. Well, how do you mature into it? It's the moment that you look at your base, the people who put you there, and you say, no, you can't have that. I'm going against you. And that's when you become the true speaker. And if you look at why Nancy Pelosi was so successful for so many years, is that she would say to the progressives, I'm one of you, you don't get this. We need to, my majority makers, my moderates, or we need to do something bipartisan, but you don't get this. And that's why she stayed so long as leader.
So did he just say no to his base, Sarah, or did his base shift? Is the Republican Main Street partnership closer to his base now than it was maybe a week ago?
They are. They're much closer to his base now than they were. And he realized that that's the group he needs to get legislation done for the American people.
Wow.
And he came to that conclusion. And we're very pleased he did, because the Main Street conservatives are really trying to move the country forward and answer the needs of the American people.
All right, Sarah Chamberlain and Jim Kessler are going to be sticking with us, because coming up still, our political panel will weigh in on the split screen in the presidential race as Biden's on the campaign trail in Florida and Trump spent another day in court in New York. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
We have a situation where for the second time, Russia has invaded Ukraine. They did it in 2014. We had some kind of peace agreement.
He's out campaigning, and I'm here in the courtroom, sitting here, giving sitting up as straight as I can all day long, because you know what? It's a very unfair situation.
That was former President Donald Trump in the hallways of the court in New York, where his hush money trial continued today. Our political panel is back with us now. Sarah Chamberlain, Republican Main Street Partnership CEO, and Jim Kessler, Third Way Executive Vice President. So, Sarah, I guess technically that is true. He was in court today. Biden was traveling down to Florida, but he also talked to the cameras on the way out. What's the real difference between an actual campaign event in a different state and still being able to talk to your base?
There
on
isn't
camera.
much. And his base is never leaving Donald Trump. I actually would argue this fires him up even more. And Biden being in Florida, I think that's a little bit of a lost cause. I don't really think he can win Florida.
Yeah. That, to me, was an odd choice today. I'd love to hear from you on this, Jim. The president in Tampa today, indeed, says he thinks Florida is in play. He elaborated on that. Here's what he said.
I think Florida's in play nationally. Talking about that this election is a basic old-fashioned election. It's about getting out the votes. It's about putting together campaigns the old-fashioned way. Not that we don't use all the technology available, but just everything from knocking on doors to putting up road signs to make sure that we get people to the polls, all those things.
They're calling Florida ground zero for the MAGA message here. He's there in just a couple weeks ahead of the 6-week abortion ban taking effect. I get the messaging here. Is Florida actually part of the roadmap that the Biden campaign is looking at here? Or is it just that he's free to roam while his challenger's locked in a courtroom?
If Florida's in play, Democrats are in a really good shape. Let me just throw that out there. I don't think so.
Okay.
I mean, they thought it was in play last time. It wasn't. I mean, you know, he lost by a few points. And then in the midterms, it went even worse for Democrats. Look, I don't think it matters so much where you go. I agree with Sarah. It's like you can have campaign events anywhere. Abortion is definitely going to be a topic in this in this election. Democrats have overperformed in nearly every election since the Dobbs decision. So I think he's where the news is on this topic.
I guess I understand that, but I guess why not still take the same argument to, say, a swing state that ultimately could matter, like Michigan, where RFK Jr. is now on the ballot. I know, Jim, you worked very hard on making sure no labels wouldn't be on the ballot, but you still have third parties that are. How much should that risk really be what is focused on?
So I don't think this campaign is going to be decided by how many days Joe Biden was not able to get to Michigan.
Okay.
You know, we've got months left in this race. He's going to be in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania over and over and over again. But, you know, you go to other places as well, and the right message in those other places. RFK will be a problem for Biden in Michigan. Like, there are votes that he's losing because of the Israel-Gaza conflict that are drifting to third parties. So he's going to have to make a real play there. I don't think Florida's the answer, but the abortion issue is definitely one of the, you know, places to go.
We've also seen polling, though, that shows RFK eating into Donald Trump's voting. That NBC poll last weekend reminds us of that prospect. There's a lot of more crossover when it comes to issues as opposed to some name ID confusion, I guess, when it comes to the Kennedys. If Michigan is that close, I don't know if the Natural Law Party is the answer, which he's running on here, but does Donald Trump have to worry about that?
Absolutely. And I actually think Donald Trump was surprised at how many votes RFK is pulling away from him. And some of it is the anti-vax.
Yeah.
And we have to watch that very closely as Republicans,
because
he's
won't have so many
damaging
nice
us.
things to say about RFK.
Maybe he
Jr.
won't. We'll have to wait and see. But I think he's damaging both Republicans and the Democratic candidates. You know, they're two old men, and people are looking for an option.
Wow.
And they're going to JFK.
Option C, I guess, whatever option C turns out to be.
How about that? Is there such thing as a two-way spoiler? Could you do that? I guess you have to spoil for one or the other.
Right. So one of the things that has happened is Democrats have gotten the jump on RFK, and I think the Trump campaign has been slow off the mark. So you see that Democrats are talking about how RFK is a right-wing nut, and he's crazy on this and that. And so they've already started waging a campaign against them while Donald Trump thought, like, well, he could help me. So they're laid off the job.
All the while, Joe Biden just keeps showing that photo with the Kennedys
Right.
that was taken recently at the White House. Great to see you both. Sarah Chamberlain, Republican Main Street Partnership CEO, and Jim Kessler, Third Way Executive Vice President. We thank you. A real peek behind the curtain.
Indeed.
Courtesy of these two, Kaylee. Check out the Washington Edition newsletter on the terminal and online.
And come back and see us tomorrow. Thank you for joining us this evening. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and Radio.